by far. Most people do not like it when you talk about Plutonian subjects. Death, destruction, taboo topics like conspiracy theories, secret societies, wielding transcendental power from the shadows, sorcery, black magic. There's tons of dark buzz about the United States going through its first Pluto return. But our story starts the last time Pluto transited these degrees of the heavens, roughly 248 years ago, depending on when you're watching this. On a hot 4th of July day, 1776, in the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, a territory of the British Empire. That afternoon saw the formal adoption by the Continental Congress of the Declaration of Independence. It was a bold pronouncement, a statement of sovereignty, detailing grievances with and declaring freedom from the British Empire. And so, the United States of America was born. Fast forward about 248 years, and here we are. 248 years is about the length of time it takes dwarf planet Pluto to orbit the sun. And so, for the United States, Pluto returns to its natal degree, heralding a time when the powerfully disruptive and transformative influence of Pluto is at peak. Normal people don't have Pluto returns. We don't typically live to see age 248. Nations, corporations, other enterprises that do endure 248 years have a Pluto return at that time. So why the buzz? Pluto's not even a planet, right? We'll look at why the buzz. And the good, the bad, and the ugly of Pluto in U.S. astrology. We'll look at what's happening and what's happened to past empires and nations under this influence. And we'll look at the chart work around the United States' first Pluto return. I'm Michael. This is oneskyastrology. Welcome, Star Family. This one might be a longer one, but stick around because this one's going to be gaga. I'm going to present info to benefit people who are trying to understand the phase of evolution that the United States is currently going through and how that might affect the world. And I'll present info intended to benefit users, students, and practitioners, teachers of astrology, regardless of school or method. You'll see chart work in this video that uses a little bit unusual zodiac. My own school of practice is constellational. I'm a Western siderealist, and I use uneven zodiac signs, which are astronomically accurate, commonly called true sidereal astrology. And true isn't a claim to truth in any kind of philosophical or logical sense, and true doesn't imply that other branches of astrology are less correct. True means exact or precisely measured, and it can be understood in contrast to ideas like approximate or estimated. Most branches of astrology have used uniform or even sign zodiacs since late 5th century BC Babylon, well over 2,000 years ago. And the uniform zodiac's actually one of the more inspired innovations in the history of astrology. I'm personally grateful for it. I love it, and I also practice in a different way. For more information about true sidereal and why one might approach astrology from that angle, visit my website. This video is about the United States Pluto return, which is coming up soon, no matter what kind of astrology you like. Due to the information, I'm going to be engaged directly with the camera a little bit less. I found this information very challenging to digest, to organize. And instead of talking from bullet points and buzzwords, like I usually do, I had to develop a little more robust script for this in the interest of clear, organized communication. If you're used to my usual video format, you know I like a nice clean intro, set some context, jump right into the chart work. In this video, I'm going to take the time to establish more ample context. and present more introductory information so that when we finally get to the chart work, you'll hopefully have gained a lot of information that will empower your own understanding of what we'll look at, as well as being able to understand why I have arrived at my conclusions. All right, let's clarify the questions around this. Who will this affect? This transit is going to affect everyone whose life or livelihood is in any way connected to the United States. To some extent, because it heralds systemic change for the US and the implications, it could affect virtually everyone who uses money, and it may have ripples down to uncontacted tribes and Aboriginal people. So that's who this concerns. We've established the idea of the what. The definition of a Pluto return is a conjunction, a sameness of degree between transiting Pluto, Pluto in the real-time sky, and the position or degree that planet occupied at the time of the charts, at the time of the nativity of whatever you're looking at. That's a return, and that's a 248-year orbit, so Pluto is returning, and that's the what. When we come to the when, there are some different understandings out there in regard to how to calculate a return. Different schools of thought get different dates with their methods. I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but I need to break this down a little. Mainstream astrology, Western astrology, aka tropical astrology, reckons the date of the alignment to be February 22nd, 2022. However, tropical generally doesn't correct for the astronomical phenomenon of precession, referring to the Earth's axial precession, or historically known as the precession of the equinox. Precession describes the very slow drift of what we call the fixed stars. The heavens seem to rotate very slowly relative to Earth's seasonal orientation. So if you watched the stars with which the sun rose, the stars immediately before the sun rose that were visible, and you knew where the sun was rising, and you watched that at the same point in time, let's say the vernal equinox, over years and years and years and decades, you would see that the fixed stars actually move very slowly relative to the seasonal markers. I'm not going to get into it, but I encourage the study of the history of astrology, and I've found that most practitioners lack a grasp of the roots and chronology of the development of their own craft. I'll use sidereal reckoning as I do, being a siderealist, and that accounts for precession. Remember, the tropical zodiac is also called the moving zodiac because it's oriented relative to the northern hemisphere seasons, and each year it moves a wee bit one direction, while the heavens that it's describing move a wee bit the other way. So when you calculate a Pluto orbit by these two different methods, there's a discrepancy of 730 days. The distance Pluto travels in 730 days is equal to the distance that the fixed stars have appeared to drift over that 248-year period of Pluto's orbit. Two different methodologies, two different results. One system accounts for celestial motion, the other doesn't. Sidereally, Pluto returns to 32 degrees 57 minutes and 11 seconds of constellation Sagittarius on February 22nd, 2024, 2 years later, and remains in orb through late 2025 in an arc that peaks in tandem with the 2024 transfer of presidential power in the US. So tropical reckoning yields 222.22, and sidereal reckoning yields 222.24. So we're starting to develop a picture of when this happens. I want to make a note here before we get to the where this happens. It's a point that goes to why astrology is generally considered a scientific laughingstock. Basically, mainstream Western astrology has put forth the idea that Pluto has a 245 years, 7 months, and 18 days orbit. That's an idea that tropical astrologers have unified around and are presenting. that 2022 signifies an orbit of Pluto. That mainstream Western reckoning calculates that Pluto's orbit takes 89,717 days. And here we're going to get into some big numbers, so I'm going to put that up on the screen. Sidereal astrology says that 247 years, 7 months, and 18 days, 90,447 days, is the calculated orbit of Pluto, its return to point of origin. And when we look to the science of astronomy, there are some different figures available. And there's an expected margin of error due to irregularities like direct and retrograde motion and Pluto's elliptical and highly irregular orbit. But United States National Space Science Data Center, NASA, and Montana State University's Bozeman Series project agree. They say Pluto has an orbital period of 90,465 days around the sun. And that's 247 years, 8 months, 7 days, meaning that Sidereal astrology's calculations, my software, when I put my software to the test, it comes up with a difference of 18 days. Again, there's an expected margin of error due to irregular motion and other factors. That gives a rate of deviation of 0.02%. I didn't calculate to find out what one standard unit of deviation is. So I don't really, you need a mass of data to do that. That's actually related to a bell curve, a data set. This is one calculation. So I couldn't tell you. You would have to do a lot of calculations for Pluto to find out how far off those calculations fell. And then you could develop an idea of actually how accurate it is. What I did was develop an idea of how accurate sidereal is relative to tropical when held to scientific data. And tropical is 2 years and 18 days in discrepancy with science. A rate of deviation of almost 1%, generally not acceptable for precise calculations. And this is the point that I'd like to take the time to make. There's only one thing happening, there's only one reality, and there's two somewhat conflicting maps to help us navigate it. The 14th Dalai Lama, the current Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso, said to the world in the 2005 New York Times op-ed, he said, if science proved some belief of Buddhism wrong, then Buddhism will have to change. So science takes issue with tropical astrology. It's typically not operating within a scientifically acceptable margin of error, so it's dismissed as illegitimate. And frankly, that's science. And here we can see good reason for that. But Neil deGrasse Tyson and mainstream science can all talk shit till their breath stinks. At the end of the day, that's their problem, not mine. And it's not sidereal astrology's either. Our problem is keeping our work within an appropriate margin of error so that we can continue to gather good data. All right, onward. We've discovered who, what, when, where. So, locationally, the United States. But earlier I said it will have an effect worldwide. Simply put, one of the reasons is Pluto's significance to the formation of the United Nations, and the other is just a matter of practical knowledge and common sense. The US dollar is by far the most important currency on the in the global market. It's the standard unit of transaction on global commodity markets, and as a foreign reserve currency, it makes up more than 60% of global foreign exchange reserves. So United States economic stability is quite systemic to the health and well-being of a staggering number of people. And the U.S. is, for better or worse, saddled with incredible responsibility, because if it weakens, others also weaken. If it falls, it will take a lot of other global players down with it. I would argue that the economics of this situation alone make it a situation of global relevance. So unlike a lot of events that affect nations, this one is much more likely to have global shockwaves. Okay, last question. How? How does the Pluto return behave? There's no precedent for us. What about previous empires? There's tons of data there to sift through, so we're going to blaze through history here. I'll summarize the two cultures historically most similar to the United States. That's the Roman Empire and the British Empire. And we'll look at some others, just we'll gloss them very briefly. When we examine the Roman Empire and its Pluto returns, the first Pluto return saw the crisis of the 3rd century, which doesn't mean anything to anyone today, except for history scholars, but it was a big deal back then. There was a string of briefly reigning military emperors and rebellious generals, and various and sundry claimants to power. They turned Roman high society into a 3-ring circus. It was governmental chaos, political extremism. It ended in civil war. It was a period of terrible social instability and economic damage to the empire. And then on the second Pluto return of the Roman Empire, Vandals invaded and pillaged Rome. Rome retaliated by sea and immediately lost their entire fleet and supporting an accompanying allied fleet to the superior force of the Vandals. And shortly afterwards, they collapsed for good. We're starting to see a pattern emerge, and this is what the buzz is about. This is what the buzz is about. British Empire. So we know they're still sort of around. Just kidding, friends. We know the British Empire has survived 3 Pluto returns. The first Pluto return saw the Great Famine. It killed millions, and it also saw Scotland take up arms, winning victory at the Battle of Bannockburn under Robert the Bruce, claiming sovereignty from Britain. Dreadful times. Second Pluto return in Britain, a major insurrection, widespread persecution of Protestants by the majority Catholics, but the first solo female monarch, Mary I, solo female, meaning she didn't need a king, and these shifts helped usher in the Elizabethan era, which was undeniably a golden age of cultural development. And here we see Pluto's rebirth and regeneration, the qualities of rebuilding that Pluto also exhibits. Healing, after the storm, then the flowers sprout, and Pluto governs the whole process. Anyway, Elizabeth inherited British bankruptcy and brought economic respectability to the empire, while also overseeing a massive global exploration enterprise and initiating a period of relative internal peace and stability. She also formalized the royal slave trade, which lasted until the 3rd Pluto return, when it was dismantled as part of those structural changes. So that's a very Plutonian thing. And at the 3rd Pluto return, the British creation of the UK with Northern Ireland took place. An insane amount of global warfare was happening, even for the British. And in an attempt to keep the empire duct taped together, they were dealing with the madness of King George, an imperial ruler who had literally been declared insane by his doctors but refused to step away from leadership, plunging the country and the empire into a period of profound chaos. Also notable, there's been a long-term change in the structure of power at each Pluto return. The first one saw the transition from the line of kings to the rulership by the barons. And then the second one saw a movement towards parliament and a commons. And third saw the executive power start moving towards the prime minister while incorporating the Parliament and Commons. Elsewhere in the world of Pluto returns, I've examined Spain, Portugal, Austria, Switzerland, France, Russia. And they've all come through these periods intact, as we know, but they've all changed forms of governance, joined larger unions of nations, and in the case of France and Russia, suffered the death of the figurehead symbolizing national virility. Respectively, Napoleon and Stalin both died as their nation's Pluto returns went exact. So what is Pluto? Well, for a dwarf, Pluto is a straight-up boss. Pluto's a quiet boss, like Don Vito Corleone in The Godfather. Actually, I think Marlon Brando captured that character really well, that quality, the electric tension between passion and heartlessness, often at the same time, just electric. And it's that deeply passionate power obsession combined with the icy ruthlessness needed to achieve power goals. It's a very common feature of strong Pluto, any strong Pluto expression. Pluto can be a boss, but you wouldn't recognize that it was the boss. It's a secret boss. It loves to play small, disguised as the driver instead of sitting in the back of the limo. It's an outsider, a stranger, a newcomer, so they wouldn't even suspect the real power. They wouldn't even know. Pluto's a big boss, and Pluto is a driver. Pluto's a dual planet. Its moon, Charon, is half its size, and the center of gravity rests in the space between the two bodies, making it a literal dual, the only one in our system that we know. Charon in mythology was the ferryman across the river Styx, literally the driver, the small and unassuming figure. He wasn't a dynamic big boss presence, like Hades, dark lord of the realm of death, with his three-headed demon dog, and no, he was like a scraggly guy with a stick. If you didn't know what to look for, you'd never see it, and that's a quality of Pluto. But those who knew made careful literary and mythological note of the need to honor that aspect of the journey through death and rebirth, and dying with a coin to compensate Charon was simple good form in a prior age. So when I think of Pluto, it's just like this. It's duality. It's two things. They're opposite extremes. They can work together, even if figuring that out is a sort of weird balance. It can be an awkward journey for most people in their personal lives. But Pluto reflects a part of ourselves that even if we were more interested in looking at, would actually be really hard to see, because Pluto operates at the level of the unconscious mind, and in charts it tends to describe the deepest and most compelling life and evolutionary desires, which are always acting under the surface. Pluto correlates that immortal aspect of us, what mystical traditions have called the soul or the mind stream, that which is reborn or what reincarnates. Pluto correlates in a life to change, the process of evolution, transformation, metamorphosis, death, and rebirth. It acts to increase depth and intensity. It acts to polarize situations and dynamics, including toward extremes. It can be very hot or very cold. It can even be both at once in a very confusing dance. But it's never ever lukewarm, and Pluto's never ever comfortable. The way Pluto creates transformation is often jarring. Pluto is not a moral force, and it isn't a force that cares about your feelings. It's compelled by more transcendental and profound evolutionary processes than most people concern themselves with consciously at the level of everyday life. Pluto isn't consistent like some planets are, but Pluto is awesomely unpredictable. What is consistent are themes of power and powerlessness, death and rebirth, radical transformation. And Pluto consistently divides from within. It amplifies any internal antagonism. It drives wedges which force endings and breaks, and at the same time ruling over the processes of regeneration and rebirth as an initiator of new beginnings. It breaks things down, destroys things, and then it plants the seeds of the next evolutionary phase in the rubble. Pluto manifests behind the scenes, invisibly, in secret. It's given to obsessions and compulsions. It will spy, it will manipulate, it will betray, it will abuse, and teach lessons about powerlessness. It rules the taboo, the occult, it rules darkness, organized crime, black magic, corrupt power, and entrapment, hatred, death, and suicide. And at the same time, Pluto's ability to penetrate to depth reveals to us the psychology of consciousness, awareness of real motivations and real intention, awareness of the unseen and the hidden, the real lessons, reasons, and evolutionary processes at work under the surface of our everyday experiences. So Pluto offers deep meaning, which helps us understand our lives in context. It can be security and trust in the outer world to provide. It aligns us with our deepest purpose in life, symbolizing in a chart the prior existing intention of the soul regarding the life's very purpose and how that purpose will be approached. Pluto's tapped into the bliss of the infinite and yet remains individual. It's a neat trick. It connects us to transcendental reality beyond space and time, and it offers us lessons in which we can discover and explore our own power, just as easily as it can show us how powerless we can be. So there's a bright light and a long shadow here. Pluto's typically very difficult to understand, and it remains difficult to predict too. If you're confused by the idea of an archetype that manifests as two polar opposites or radically different things at the same time, you're actually getting the point. So stay with it. We're finally almost to some charts now. Before we get to the charts, I want to address a major point of contention. I wouldn't say, well, I would. It's contested. When it comes to the astrology of the United States, to the nativity time specifically, well, to the date, geez, I mean, there are different years out there. I mean, there are several conflicting times reported, suggested, inferred, and deduced. It's an absolutely tedious series of debates, but since it's an issue and I've already established my preference for accuracy, I want to explain why I calculate the nativity the way that I do. I'm going to save a lot of time here and give you the very abbreviated version. Two prominent colonial Philadelphia astrologers at the time made notes, drew charts, and kept record of the timing of events of July 1776. Independently, each of them reported the declaration was signed at 10:10 p.m. Since standardized time zones hadn't been conceived of yet, no time zone was specified. As far as the British were concerned, there was only one time zone, and that was London time. So we subtract 5 hours to arrive roughly at Philadelphia time, a common practice amongst astrologers in the British colonies, and voila, 10:10 p.m. becomes 5:10 p.m. It's a very common thing to see, the U.S. nativity being given to July 4th, 1776 at 5:10 p.m. There are other times, there are other days, there are other years suggested that people give to the nativity of the United States of America. But if this birth time is correct, as I suspect it is, the angles of the chart will need to give accurate info. And I'm going to open up the United States natal chart. So we have to look at the timing of events to kind of test and dial in the accuracy of the chart. The thing that moves, as the Earth rotates throughout the course of the day, the chart moves around. So the chart actually moves the other way. The chart's moving. So a difference in birth time would mean that the angles, ascendant, imum coeli, descendant, and midheaven, these angles would be in different places of the chart. So if the time is wrong, the angles won't give data. They won't give results. If the timing's right, you'll see very specific Plutonian events as Pluto transits the angles. So we'll go over that really quickly. Pluto transited the ascendant in 2001. Big World Trade Center bang. War on Terror. I think that speaks for itself. Definitely restructured the nation in systemic ways. Then in 1973, Pluto transited the midheaven. We were embroiled in Vietnam, and we saw Watergate. Shadowy, behind-the-scenes, manipulative power plays with. I mean, the whole thing is it's almost as Plutonian as the World Trade Center tragedy. And then we have Pluto transiting the descendant. This dates to 1897. And that ended the Panic of 1893. It was a 4-year depression. It was brutal. The unemployment rate hit 25% in Pennsylvania, 35% in New York, 43% in Michigan. It affected all levels of society and radically restructured politics. We entered a very progressive era as a result. And that fits. That's good enough for me. So one more to go. We got the IC, and Pluto moved around to transit the IC in 1823, which was to the year when legislation differentiating slave states and free states was passed. And it also saw the first full-scale war, military engagement with Plains tribes of the indigenous American nations, the Arikara War. And in 1824, 1 year later, the presidential election, the only one ever to tie in the popular vote and electoral vote, going to the House of Representatives to be decided. It was decided that that president would be John Quincy Adams, and he was sworn into office having claimed neither the majority popular or electoral votes. Now that is not Plutonian. What is Plutonian is that ordeal divided the Republican-Democrat Party, which had stood strong against the Federalist Party, winning a streak of 6 prior elections. But 1824 saw the disgrace and discredit of the entire Federalist Party and the painful division of the previously unified Republican Democrats into Republicans and Democrats. And they've been snarling at each other like wounded animals ever since, right up to the present day. So that, my friends, is Plutonian, and that's good enough for me. So I'm very satisfied with the timing of Ebenezer Sibley and John Early. And when we look at this information on the United States, we're going to be looking at it from the point of view of a nation that was born, literally, in accord with this date at 5:10 p.m., 4th of July, 1776. The most interesting thing about that birth time to me isn't that it passes with flying colors. No, that's interesting, but more interesting is that that's Scorpio Ophiuchus rising, and Pluto is therefore the United States chart ruler. That's a lot. That's really interesting. Things that affect the chart ruler affect the whole chart and organism systemically, very systemically. It's like the sun and moon. It takes a like things that affect it are just going to affect everything. Yeah, Gotta kind of let that sink in. But what I want to do is take a look at the placement. I just want to isolate Pluto. We're going to start here and work. We'll work out to the things that it's touching. We're going to do this pretty quickly. Let's break it down to basics. Pluto is in the second house in a critical degree, a late degree. The last degree is called a critical degree of Sagittarius on the Capricorn cusp, in the degree, well in the degree of orb, a fixed star, Altair, Alpha Achille. So let's keep things very simple. The second house. The second house is an area of the sky that correlates with and sort of governs the area of life of our internal values and our material security. The constellation, the stars of Sagittarius, are about truth, freedom, natural law, higher philosophy, religion, spirituality, larger context, bigger picture, things that affect the whole globe. And the shadow of it is that it's very zealous, very overconfident at times. The critical degree of Sag ensures a fully mature expression. So on the Pluto level, the United States is here because humanity has already internalized enough of the evolutionary learning processes of Sagittarius to bring a fruitional vision. We could say that the implementation of a global vision of truth and freedom was the unconscious and underlying process of U.S. evolution, the prior existing intention that caused it to come about in the first place, whether known or not. And it's almost never known. So we can look at Pluto that way. Capricorn emphasizes a markedly different set of values, which could be summarized as societal systems and structures, responsibilities, consequences, created law, hard work, conformity, institutions, and corporations. Shadow of Capricorn is the guilt, shame complex, fear of growth and change. And when we look at fixed star Altair, we find the information that it confers a bold, confident, valiant, unyielding, ambitious, and liberal nature, great and sudden but ephemeral wealth, and a position of command, and it makes its natives guilty of bloodshed. It adds boldness and the ability to achieve through risk-taking and determination, a star of action and strength, according to Bernadette Brady. And the first part was Vivian Robson, who I usually poo-poo, but that tracks. So let's take just these elements. We have how many elements? We have Pluto, that's 1. We have Capricorn and Sagittarius, that's 2, 3. We have Altair, 4. In the second house, 5. And we're going to do something that you do when you're learning astrology. You do synthesis. We're going to generate some synthesis. It's a practice exercise, and it's easy because hindsight's 20/20. But you just isolate some chart features that are in contact with each other, and you start to make sentences out of the building blocks of just the simplest core concepts. So, the soul of the nation. The deep driving impulse at the core of the American collective unconscious, Pluto, is an impulse to wield power, that's the Cap-Sag cusp, in a balanced way, that's cusp, in order to generate new systems and institutions around the values of truth and freedom, as well as hard work and rule of law. The evolutionary journey, Pluto, of the United States will be organized around religious freedom, critical late Sag, and the truth of natural law and nature's God, critical late Sag. But it will be tasked with maintaining, Capricorn, a social system, Capricorn, built on values of law and order, second house Capricorn, which blends with and incorporates, cusp, spiritual liberty, Sag. It'll have to battle urges to proselytize and convert, Sag, as well as to wield manipulative authority over others. It's Pluto Capricorn thing. On its journey to reach and realize the potential of its great dream, Sagittarius, and bring it to the real world, Capricorn. It takes a bold approach, Altair, to this evolutionary arc, deeply committing, Pluto, to confidence, bold action, risk-taking, and assuming command position, Altair. So like I said, hindsight, always 2020. Like, it's really easy to piece that together when you already know what you're talking about. But at the same time, that's textbook. I mean, that's cookbook. I'm just pulling archetypes and concepts and putting them into sentences, and those sentences describe United States. So that synthesis, that's what you start to see, and you start to gain the ability to translate the language of astrology into English. So we got to look now at the aspects that Pluto's making in the U.S. natal chart. I want to show you some very important things that condition it. We have South Node in the U.S. natal chart conjoined with Pluto very widely in a balsamic conjunction in second house Capricorn. And it gives me two main ideas. This is going to affect the national temperament generally, specifically around values, but especially around American financial values and what Americans will and won't do to survive. All of this becomes distorted and corrupted by South Node. It all becomes subject to kind of a dark complex, and Pluto South Node looks batshit crazy from the outside. The truth is there's an internal logic to it, and it serves an important evolutionary purpose, but in birth charts it tends to indicate a little insanity, problems until the later years. So it sets that up in the it's the soul of the nation, isn't it? Oh man. It promises opportunity to work off past karma, especially government, power karma, wealth, financial sector karma, upper economic tier karma, that kind of thing. The South Node, due to its part in a grand trine with Saturn and Uranus, one of the things a grand trine does is slate those affected bodies for accelerated evolution, advanced sort of track of evolution. You can undergo a lot of evolution in the areas where you see points in grand trine. Grand trine with Saturn Uranus indicates that prior attempts to reform and evolve society around more humanitarian ideals and values will be continued here, and that much will in fact be renovated and updated in the process. I think the important thing to understand is that much of the development of the United States will actually be unconsciously organized around the opportunity to burn those past karmas and to continue the great work of experimenting with humanitarian and freedom-oriented forms of society, and also the great work of globalization. We have another aspect of Pluto that's really worth mentioning, and it's opposite Mercury. So here's Mercury in 8th house Cancer. Here's Pluto in 2nd house Sag. And this is linking the national mentality, to Pluto's polarity. So it expresses great depth and profundity. It can. It'll have that potential, and at the same time capable of expressing as more like vapid and kind of it's kind of brain dead, zombified. It generates suspicion, given, received, or both. It links in the collective consciousness the secret and manipulative, divisive Pluto qualities to the mercurial expression. the way ideas are learned and organized, and the way thoughts are expressed. And it sets the stage for an ongoing battle of ideas. And we're also opposite the North Node, so we have a Pluto North Node opposition, and yeah, widely gibbous, and applying opposition. It tells us that the way Pluto will direct available resources towards its own goals, these evolutionary goals, relates to 8th house Cancer. And that's a signature of nurturing others, caring for and healing old wounds in the self and in others, approaching the mysteries and the intricacies of life and death with warmth and compassion. And as it relates to magic, mysticism, secret societies, the occult, and the use of hidden power, it indicates the task or goal of developing a path with heart. Actually, as Pluto hit its sort of the fullness of its own internal cycle, transited North Node. So we had transiting Pluto over North Node, opposite natal Pluto. As North Node and Pluto were exact, I believe the United Nations was conceived in San Francisco and born in New York City. So you see, this is the 8th house, and it's governing other people's resources, and the lesson, the karmic goal, if you will, signified by North Node of the United States, becomes interesting from that point of view. I'll talk a little about that later. The whole relationship between Pluto and the nodes tells me that the underlying idea is to continue to reform, renovate, and update the systems of political and financial power. You know, the evolutionary intention of the U.S. from the beginning can clearly be expressed as putting the powerful American nose in other people's business. And the impulse to do this is going to be completely compelling. And the task is to learn to do it responsibly with ethical values, to leave places better than you found them in a way that nourishes instead of depletes, that learns to genuinely help others instead of heartlessly manipulating them. We're trying to the midheaven in 10th house Virgo. That's a trine between Pluto and midheaven. And that connects all of this Pluto complex to our public image here stateside. Connects the Pluto complex to how the rest of the world sees United States. And it's also trine to Neptune here in 10th house Virgo. When Pluto and Neptune trine, it initiates a search for a new spirituality, a new model for God, a deeper, more profound understanding beyond knowledge, beyond academic approaches, spiritual experience of great depth and intensity. And it gives a desire to embrace heterodoxical, maybe syncretic forms of spiritual practice, putting together just your own form of personal spiritual practice, rather than finding something out there that you can fit into. Finding a way to describe and channel and practice what naturally arises from within. Very, 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 very much a signature of this contact. And it's time. We've painted the broad strokes. We've got some detail work. Hopefully a picture is starting to emerge of Pluto in the U.S. And all the information presented so far, everything has been contextual. Even now we're looking at the birth chart. This is the context. This is the basis of the Pluto return. So I've established the basis, the ideas, the dynamics, and the methods involved, and identified patterns that'll help us understand what we're looking at when we look at it. So let's take a look. Here in the inner wheel, we have the United States natal chart, which we just took a little look at. So we've examined that. Here in the outer wheel, we have the Pluto return of United States. Here here's Pluto, having returned to the very natal degree. So let's see what's going on here. First thing I notice is Pluto is with Mars and Venus and South Node, and this is a big conjunction. We have transiting Mars conjoined transiting Venus on natal South Node in Capricorn, conjoined to the Pluto return. All of this because the nodes always work together, and because there is a natural and direct opposition, is connected to the moon transiting United States North Node. That's the first thing I see. Whatever may happen, this is nearly guaranteed to be very compelling and very dramatic. The passion around the return will be linked very directly to the past, to national history, and to also deep old karmic triggers. I mean, this does go back to Greece. This does go back to Egypt. This does go back. This is not like a bunch of us just showed up here like, oh, hey, United States, you don't say. Like, no, the great builders and movers and shakers here. I mean, this is a great enterprise. This is a long karmic project. This is an undertaking of ages, and the old and deep karmic triggers that are likely to be activated by the passion of Venus Mars are connected to this deep past. Deep. Pluto return. Deep. Everything. Deep. This goes deep. The Capricorn South Node does subject the passion of Venus Mars to a strong twist of negative emotions, a survival complex around fear, shame, doubt. And the South Node takes from us. That's what it does. South Node takes from us to show us spiritual truth, to orient us to our spiritual path. It shows us we don't need that anymore. And now it's in the way of further evolution, so let it go. Except the South Node doesn't really say, let it go, all the time. Sometimes it just pulls the rug right out from under you. The nodes always work together as an axis, and that does, like I said, bring in this Cancer moon. And a Cancer moon is big feelings, and this is going to give a very heartfelt response and a very great desire to move forward, forward as a nation. And again, this degree of the sky correlate to the creation of United Nations. So there may be there may be a connection there. There may not be. That might be a little. There's nothing there that suggests it will be. It's just a coincidental degree of the sky. But I mentioned that Pluto North Node, conjunction saw the United Nations. But the Pluto South Node conjunction, when the secondary progressed, conjunction between Pluto and South Node, when exact, that correlated to the invention of the Peace Corps. So Pluto and the nodes, as weird and dark and mysterious as all those actors are, somehow when they got together in this configuration, as a great humanitarian effort. Great humanitarian effort arose out of it. I'm very Sagittarian, but also indicative of kind of the next thing I see, which is that Aquarius moon. And United States moon and white moon Priapus, the lunar perigee, the closest point in moon's somewhat irregular orbit to Earth. So that would be perigee. It's a partner with lunar apogee, black moon Lilith. But let's focus on Moon Priapus for a while. Moon Priapus in Aquarius, transited by Sun and Mercury at the time of the Pluto return. This affects the natal moon, Priapus in Aquarius, and that natal moon is just in that configuration. At best, it's an ingenious maverick, and at worst, it's rapey and detached. It doesn't care. It could be problematic. And when it comes to how the United States feels about itself, Moon Priapus in Aquarius has always, you can see this, it's given Americans confidence to share their ideas and feelings. That's a Moon Priapus thing. Just integrate, get out there, get in there, connect. It can give overconfidence and indicate the use of too much force or a distorted view of how to integrate with others. Sun and Mercury, as they transit here, that'll link that particular dynamic that I just mentioned with awareness, thought, and communication. And given the emphasis on the past, the long U.S. history of foreign manipulation and inserting themselves into situations, these dynamics may become centered. Also centered might be communication, talk, in the international community. The 11th house can indicate the societal context, and in a national chart, that would be other nations, that would be the world. And this could indicate that at this time we could see the benefit and detriment of the United States to the world scrutinized, debated in the world arena, the cultural, political, and economic benefits and detriments of United States to the world. You know, the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. And they're still talking about that. Oh, Voltaire. So at the same time as the Pluto return is exact, we have some other major cycles of evolution playing a role alongside, and we're going to jump to that right now. So at the same time as all this is happening, we've got this Pluto return wrapped up with Moon, wrapped up with Sun Moon. We get some other major stuff happening. We're in the early orb of United States Chiron return here. That's a 50-year orbit, and it's conjunct North Node while Saturn conjoins South Node. So this Chiron transiting is actually here with North Node, and it opposes South Node, which is conjoined U.S. natal Saturn. So we have an axis here. That's, you know, we have a Chiron-Saturn opposition on the nodes. And this is trauma. This is healing. This is all of the above. The consequences of the past will come knocking front and center on the world stage. Transiting nodes indicate that this transition and the gravity of it, the consequences of it, the trauma of it, is going to be closely connected to the evolutionary arc of human life on Earth. This will be a world. This is where I start to see the traumatic consequences of our past actions as a nation here in the United States. This starts to take an ominous tone here. We've already had ominous from the beginning, but now it starts to come home here with this Saturn South Node. And what's more, Eris is here with natal Chiron conjoined natal Chiron, which definitely is going to factor into this whole mix. So yeah, you can say what you want about Saturn opposite Chiron. You know, maybe we'll move forward in a healing way, North Node Chiron, and get away from the heaviness of the past, South Node Saturn. Or maybe our consequences will come knocking, and we'll be traumatized by the heavy hand of cause and effect. But with Eris in here, that's just a wild card. She just brought a deck full of jokers, and that's I mean, honestly, that's kind of how that works. Uh, if United States is serious about its healing journey and then achieving its highest purpose, it's going to have to do better than put forth rhetoric. You know, this situation is asking for actual reconciliation and you know, for us to reconcile. Everything is reconciling South Node here. Everything is Saturn and Capricorn, and you know, I don't know if the United States is really prepared to address something like this. I mean, right now, very weakened, divided nation, and we do, like I said, we need more here to address a situation like this than truth, justice, and happy meals. We need we're seeing a chart that's asking United States people to level with themselves, look at their blind spots, look at what we're afraid to admit to ourselves. Let the skeletons out of the closet. You know, if they scare you, put a summer dress on them and have a really honest tea party. Just you and your monsters, you know, sit around and I mean, that's almost a best case. Because the other side of critical late Sagittarius and the fruitional expression of truth and freedom and all of this, you know, good stuff is early Capricorn and its lessons about cause and effect, consequence, responsibility. And it's relating to Pluto's manipulative, power-obsessed, ruthless, cutthroat tactics. And that's the thing about United States of America. The soul of the nation is profoundly split right now. But it always has been. That's what people, you have to study history to see it. But then once you see it, it's like, oh, we're schizoid nation here. Stateside, we have a Pluto complex. It's our chart ruler. The psyche of the nation is cooking in this cauldron of opposing forces of expansion and contraction. And to consider the U.S. is to consider two things at once. On the one hand, it's an important phase in the long endeavor to develop humanitarian democratic forms of social organization following on the great success of ancient Greece, making actually some drastic civil improvements on it. I mentioned that. I'll mention it again. The women's rights movement here today approaches gender equality, only gaining momentum, and I do know that a woman is only worth 79% of what a man is worth in this economy, and I do know that it's been that way for 15 years without relief. In ancient Greece, women were second-class citizens and didn't have the power to vote. You know, I'm not trying to say we're there yet, but I do think we've come a long way towards gender equality and the uplift of the entire human collective here in the United States. I think that's a very important part of our history. Elsewhere, under the umbrella of drastic civil improvements to democracy, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States prohibits state-sanctioned slavery, with the notable exception of convicted inmates. And in ancient Greece, slavers openly trafficked, kidnapped, and conquered people for sale down by the docks. Whole different setup. I think that represents an evolutionary step, an improvement, isn't it? If you've only lived in a violently repressive autocratic state, and the only right you've ever known is the right to shut the fuck up and do what the bad man tells you, the American dream can really seem like a paradise. But this is a Pluto story, so it's gonna have two sides. You know, they they can talk about this great American experiment in freedom and democracy, but now they're trying to actually ban the books which teach the people the history on which that great experiment was built, because there's no way around the foundation on which this enterprise was erected. You have colonialism, genocide, slavery, broken treaties, false promises, exploitation of global markets, military coercion, political manipulation, coups, puppet regimes, all funded by like massive arms dealing. And you have war. This war. All of which is actually very Pluto in Capricorn, by the way. Very, very Pluto in Capricorn. All of the above. And all of which is what will come to the surface during the Chiron return. Again, these are the monsters that America needs to sit down with and get honest about. You know, this is about the skeletons in our own closet as a culture, and as individuals too. This will resonate. It'll trigger. The cultural narrative is often related to our personal journeys. All right, one last thing about this chart. One last thing. We have Neptune at the midheaven. Very occult signature, often found in astrologers or people who use astrology, often people who engage the occult, psychics, mediums. And then we have a Neptune half return, and it's on the angles. We have Neptune on the MC and transiting Neptune on the IC. And anything on the angles takes a lot of power from that placement. So, this is a peak time of Neptunian energies. It's a time of spiritual fruition where the fruits are dependent on long work, specifically the work of the last 83 years while Neptune was transiting from its returned position. It's a time of seeing bigger picture issues around spiritual potential. So if you go into it having given the last 80 years a good run from an ethical or humanitarian point of view, it can be a time of great satisfaction, a lot of delight. But if there was potential that wasn't developed, that period of time, the Neptune half return, can signify regrets about hindsight, wishing one had done things differently. It also creates a lot of confusion and opens people up to strange outside influences. People can make decisions at this time based on delusion, denial, and general failure to read the memo. During this time, the writing could be like right there on the wall, but we may be inclined to fanciful notions, things that are closer to what we would like to believe than what's actually real. So, yeah, that's a factor. I'm going to refrain from commenting. You know, I'm holding back so much. Of course, we're almost there. I want to blaze through. I want to quick gloss some of the other factors which are worth understanding, and then we'll summarize everything. So right now, we're going to look at some supporting factors. I want to show you the United States progressed new moon as it relates to the Pluto return. So here's 22nd February 2024. That's the date of the first contact of the sidereal Pluto return. And the outer wheel is the transits here, and the inner wheel is the natal chart. And what we're looking at is the secondary progressions, because what I see concordant with the Pluto return, exact, the day, is progressed new moon. And that scares me. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say right there, I predict an event, a disruptive event. Some transits cause events, and some transits don't. Now, Pluto, as we've seen, like, causes events. I mean, this guy shakes it up. But some of the thinking on why some transits just don't cause events is because there's nothing happening in the progress chart. there's no contact, or there's no energy, there's no springboard there for something to become an event. So when I'm looking at will this Pluto transit cause an event, what I want to see is how does this Pluto transit relate to the secondary progression. And what I see is this new moon. And new moons are big event times. They're big change times. And in people's personal lives, when they have secondary progressed new moon, it's a time where you'll often see just a big shift in the direction people could start school or get married or quit a job and get another job or move to a different country. I mean, it's like that kind of stuff typically attends progressed new moons. It's an event signature, and it signifies that the event is going to set off, it's going to catalyze a 29-year cycle, and define the next evolutionary cycle of life in the United States, perhaps life all over the world. And I also want to note, I'm not going to show some any graphics for this section. I'm just going to talk. There are two transits to the United States that kind of set the stage for this event. And one of them was that the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of 2020 was right on the degree of United States natal Pluto. So, all right, let's just get a chart up here so that I can mark this up. In 2020, that conjunction, the Great Reset, the great financial restructuring of the international playing field, following on the decimation of economies by COVID-19, was correlate to Jupiter and Saturn, and they last conjoined right over Pluto. Okay, that energy is resonant with this financial reset, economic restructuring on an international level. It's very Sagittarian. Sagittarian things concern the whole globe. The other thing that I see that's really worth mentioning that you've got to understand about all this, you really got to understand. This is like, let me see if I can get just the Pluto return chart, not the biwheel. But these are the transits of Pluto's return, shifted to Washington, D.C., and from Philadelphia. And this is what I've been comparing to Pluto's natal chart in that biwheel. But what I want to illustrate here is that Pluto is still very much in orb of square with Eris. Sorry, in square aspect. It is in the degree that's still considered a square if you take a square out to 7 degrees. Now, some people don't. Some people like nice tight angles. And if you like nice tight angles, well, then you'll be fine. But if you're like me and you read all kinds of wider stuff, and even a little skeptically or in a weighted way, I've seen squares have effect out to 7. That's why I read them. So Pluto and Eris are still square. Why is that relevant? Okay, well, yeah, that was COVID. We're still here in this. That wasn't just COVID. That was COVID, and then like I said, Pluto is United States chart ruler. So while COVID was happening, we had murderous cops, the police who received very few consequences for public race killings, some of them filmed. We had massive social, racial justice movements, protests. United States saw an attempted coup by insurrection, political splintering To viewers worldwide, I want to assure you that the very social fabric of my nation, my homeland, is stretching and tearing before my eyes. Basic human connection and feeling part of a whole healthy society have been seriously compromised. The last thing I want to mention, I'm not even going to put on the screen because it's the last thing I want to mention, and in the interest of time, we are on our way. All right. That mentionable there is the solar return of the United States for 2024. I'm going to summarize that I see transformation, confusion, and financial restructuring very, very clearly. The financial restructuring could be very good in the long run. And it could be related to Bitcoin or blockchain-based cryptocurrency, the emergence of national cryptocurrencies, and a shift in the global economy towards crypto. I've talked before about the potential for a universal basic income on a global level. Crypto, literally, that is an option. We'll have to make some of the right choices to get there as a species, but there's some interesting possibility there. In summary, star family, change is inherently stressful. It produces stress, and we're always changing. Change generates stress, and stress generates change. So when we think about life, change and its stresses aren't just guarantees along the path. They literally are the path. Life doesn't become about avoiding stress, but about processing it in healthy, productive, constructive ways. Stress and change in a perpetual feedback loop is the driving mechanism of evolution, of life. It's the simple mechanism at the heart of the complexity of all that. But there's a gradual evolution, which is what we normally experience, a kind of stepwise, slow, manageable process over time of careful change. And then there's catastrophic evolution, a process of higher pressure, environmental pressure, which forces high levels of stress, which forces radical change, which is in and of itself highly stressful, which, again, this is a perpetual motion engine. This is the axis around which the smallest cog in the gears of evolution itself turn. So when we think about stress and change, we need to think about this situation in terms of a situation that's likely to get highly pressurized. I don't have a script for this part. Couldn't really write one. And the rest of it was so scripted, I wanted something at the end just to riff, to be natural. So I'm just going to wind this down with some reverse synthesis. At the beginning, we took little building blocks and we made more complex ideas by combining some of the basic archetypes in astrology. To reverse synthesize and wind it down, I want to take everything we just talked about and I want to start pulling simple, basic, like 5 words or less ideas out of that. A highly unpredictable force of nature. That's Pluto. As an astrologer, that's Pluto's baseline. And so we're in a highly unpredictable situation. And you know what we do know about Pluto is this is a planet that rules extremism and extreme situations. It could be one extreme, it could be the other. You know, a lot of times it manifests through like secret control behind the scenes. Behind the scenes in the shadows of power, manipulating both sides of a conflict or a drama that it created in the first place. And the thing about this is it doesn't really matter which side, you know. Like once you've gone extreme, you're subject to Pluto. Subject. That's what rulership means. Pluto rules extremes. If you engage in extremes, you've got to pay eventually your taxes to the ruler. I'm not really into making predictions. I'm usually just into translating data and then, you know, letting people have the information themselves and come to your own conclusions. I've found it hard to process and integrate this data without coming to the conclusion that a major destructive event which causes financial and political restructuring, political splintering, social transformation. These are the reverse synthesis I pull out first. It's a planet of disastrous transformation looming over our heads at a time when the stage is set. As I record this, it's February 12th, 2022. And it's a perfect storm. I mean, this is the cusp of the Pluto lead up. This is why we've seen all that we've seen in recent United States politics. It's Pluto. It's already happening. People think this is the event. This is the opening band. Like what you're waiting for hasn't even arrived yet. You know, with Pluto transits, there's a breakdown phase. And during the breakdown phase, it's really helpful to understand what's happening, right? And then there's an in-between phase where there's nothing except an absence, where there was once something. And in this phase, what is needed is to process grief. Gotta do it. You can't push that down. It doesn't work. It gets ugly. You've got to process it. So having your feelings. For this, we usually need community or at least some kind of close personal support. So a piece of advice, since we're engaged in trying to understand what's happening, is develop your communities. Develop your communities. And then there's a regeneration phase, a sense of experimentation and exploration and play is what that is asking for. A sense of new hope, which will emerge. There will be light at the end of whatever tunnel the United States gets the rest of everyone into. And I want to give the advice to prepare. I mean, me personally, man, my contingency plans have contingency plans. And I'm actually not kidding. Anything you can do to strengthen the resilience of your family or home unit, your community, your family, community and friends, anything you can do in the next 2 years will be to your advantage. Because when the system of government is under duress at a national level. People have to take care of each other. So, you know, where's your food? You know, where's your water? Where's your reserves of food and your reserves of water? You know, I don't think that we can look at a sequence of patterns portending even the end of great empires and consistent with sweeping political change. And not look honestly and talk honestly about that. I would be remiss in my duty as an astrologer if I tried to present information here and then said, oh, but it'll be okay. Love and light, dolphins, do the heart hands and I don't know. I mean, no. or I mean, I do heart hands all the time, but I mean, like, not as a band-aid. Let's get honest about this. This situation that we're seeing is likely to get worse before it gets better. And what we're seeing as I record this is the Trump House of Cards, you know, starting to shake in the wind. A nation divided over its ideas about what direction it wants to go in the future. And what I really want to impress on the people who are watching, still watching, if you're still watching, you're the people. And I really want to impress this on you. This isn't a partisan issue. Pluto's not partisan. Pluto doesn't care. Trump, Kennedy, you're all gonna die. That's oh yeah. That's all Pluto is like. I mean, Pluto's an equalizer. It's all equal. This isn't about politics. So don't put your faith in politics. You know, when Pluto's moving like this with the power that it has to restructure things, resonant with the recent conjunction of restructuring and all of the you know, radical activities we've seen. When Pluto is like this, find your people and you know, stay soft, stay good, stay kind. It's the tree that bends, that survives the storm. I don't have a, you know, yeah, but I'm Irish. We don't do happy endings. Not often. I wish that this were an American tale. It would probably have a happy ending. And I actually do see very, very, very bright signs, but from here they look like the silver lining on a very dark cloud. So I just want to wish everybody ease and peace and to understand the timing of all this. I make this offering so that you can understand that what's happening now is only the buildup to a major transition that will take place in 2024 and 2025 and will not be done till 2026 and well after. 2026 is when it leaves the degree of orb. But this is going to have echoes through time, ripples. I don't like giving ominous news, fam. But in this case, That's how I see it. I feel compelled to share my findings. I wish you all the very best. Thank you.